I'm all about trying to find new art materials that give me the effects I want, but that make my life easier. So when Arrtx approached me about their acrylic markers and said they don't need pumping to get them activated, I was intrigued. The question is, of course, is that true? What's the actual ink like, or the acrylic paint in them like, and what can I do with them? What sort of mark do they make? My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire. Every week I share tips and tricks and techniques that I wished I'd known about ages ago. I love watercolour, but I also love mixed media, which is where the acrylic markers come in. So please join me as I swatch out these acrylic brush pens and see whether they live up to the hype. And then I've got an odd, very odd, way of testing them out in real life. So watch to the end and see whether you think that's a hit or a miss. In the interest of transparency, these pens were supplied to me free of charge by Arrtx, but the opinions in this video are entirely my own. They have also supplied a 15% off discount code, which is in the description, but you'll have to use it quickly because sadly it is only valid for a few days. I'm super excited to try these acrylic markers from Arrtx because the first box that they sent got delivered to a house. I got a photo of that house and I have not a clue where that house was. And sadly, whoever got them did not think, oh, these aren't for me. I'll find out who they are for. So I hope wherever they are that they are enjoying them. But please don't take people's parcels, even if the courier delivers it to you. Anyway, there you go. A second set has arrived safely. And it's for 36 acrylic markers from Arrtx, and it comes all in this nice box, which looks very nice. And I've just done a review, or quite a few reviews of acrylic markers. So when they reached out and said, oh, do you want to try these? I was like, oh grief, I've done enough acrylic markers. And then they said the magic words, no pumping. So let me just show you. Brand new marker from someone else, no ink on there. And what do you have to do? Oh, actually that came out really quickly. You have to pump. Usually it takes, I don't know, 10 pumps or whatever. And if you've got 36 times 10, 360 pumps. All starts to get very boring. That came out very quickly, but that might be because it is boiling in my studio today. And in the US, they cost $38.99, and in the UK, £39.99. And Arrtx says, besides the no pumping, that they're durable, clog-free. They've got this new way of delivering the ink. They're non-toxic. They're odorless, they dry quickly, they're highly pigmented, all that stuff. Well, of course they would say it. So let's try for ourselves. There's the 36, lots of yummy colours to try. So I thought I would try swatching them out on white and black. This is cartridge paper, so heavyweight drawing paper. This is a bit of black watercolour paper. I use acrylic markers in my mixed media to bring an opaque mark to my work. So understanding how opaque they are is important for me. So that's why I'm using it on black. Of course, you might not need to do that. You might be just interested in the colours or how they blend. So I'm going to do it on both pieces of paper so that we get a good idea. Just before we start, let's have a quick look at the pen. It says shake then enjoy. So you do have to still do the shaking, and you can hear there's a ball bearing in there to mix the paint up because the paint is going to settle out. If we look at the nib, it is a brush nib. I don't know if I put it against that, it'll be easier to see. So it's a brush nib and it goes from 1 to 3.5 millimeters. It has what looks a bit like a fountain pen feed system in it. And what I like is that these transparent flowers on here, you can see how much ink is left, and you can even take off the end so that you can clearly see how much ink is there. And I like that because obviously in other pens it's a guess, and if you're just about to run out, you'd like to know. Sort of that thin lines and then thick lines. So it is a brush pen. Doesn't feel super flexible. Do nice little marks like this. Don't know whether it would be any good for brush lettering. Let's have a little look. I'm not good at brush lettering. Oh yeah, it does look like you could do brush lettering with it if you were better than me. It says just make sure you put that lid on with a good firm click once you've finished. No open stock is available, so I'm sure the white is going to run out first, and then I'll just have to replace with open stock of other white acrylic markers, or buy an entirely new set, which I'm not going to do. You can see it is taking a little while to dry. So while it's wet, it is going to move in water. Once it's dry, it's going to be waterproof. These are just straightforward acrylic inks, but you might want to use that to your advantage if you want more painterly effects. Now, white on white, not terribly helpful, is it? This is going to take quite a while because I've got 72 swatches to do. So if I haven't got anything useful to say, oh, I don't think I should. Did I shake that? If I haven't got anything useful to say, I will simply fast forward and we'll come and reach some conclusions at the end. It's quite hard to give you any idea about the durability of the nib at this point. I will look out to see if any fraying happens, but as I say, I doubt I'm going to be able to tell you anything very useful. You can see that the ink flows immediately with that no pumping, and I am very, very pleased. It's quite a nice fluorescent if you want fluorescent. As far as I know, I cannot see any information about light fastness. And acrylics usually are pretty good on the light fastness, but things like fluorescence tend to be fugitive as a pigment, but I'm afraid, say, I just can't see any information about that. This is usually the point when I get totally confused about which square I'm on, but so far I'm just double checking the numbers. So far so good. All the lid tops are numbered, the body isn't, but of course they're all colour matched, so it should all be fine. Quite interesting, say on that, the 258, the red, it looks really dense on the white, but you can see how it's sort of the transparency on the black. That's why with these I think it's really useful to do both. And again, the brush strokes are showing up a lot more on the black than they are on the white. On the white you wouldn't think there was any issue with blending and it looks quite painterly, but on the black you can definitely see the individual marks. So I might do a second layer on the black and just see what that's like. They're nice and juicy. They do feel like, I say, quite brush-like in their use, which is lovely. Oh, that's a nice colour, but I always like a teal. Right, we're halfway through. Let's start the next one. You don't have to go overboard with the shaking, but you don't know how long they've been in storage or in transit, so it's worth just giving them a good shake until you hear that sort of going through. Again, that's more of a fluorescent, so that's got quite a lot of opacity to it. That looks pretty opaque too. Well, that's a nice colour. And that was going to be a useful one. Hopefully I've cut these pieces of paper out to the right size that I can keep them in the box with the pens, because I think sometimes you need certain colours to do certain things, and this will be better for judging that. I am so drawn to those sort of turquoises and teals. Right, 5 to go, and these are all greys. Let's move that up, make sure that we're still in shot. Oh, that's quite close. Have I picked up the wrong one? No, I haven't. 715. They look very close there. I guess you can see more of a differentiation on the white. And then this is a black, our last one. Let's just go back and put on that second layer. I won't do them all, but I think it'd be quite interesting to see. Oops. How they layer up, just particularly on some of these light ones where the opacity isn't necessarily what I'd want. Because it's a brush, it definitely starts juicier and tails off. 329, just make sure I've picked up the right one. That was showing through a bit on the white as well. So what can we say about them? Okay, they're not fully opaque, but no acrylic marker I can think of is really opaque on black. You'd have to do a few extra layers, and you can see that some of the layers certainly starting to help. It's a nice range of colours. You've got some good yellows, reds, maybe not a real crimson. I mean, that's starting to get there. Obviously it looks quite different on the black. Some nice pinks and purples. That's about the darkest blue you've got. Looking on the white, maybe something a little bit more indigo would be nice, but you know, I am being nitpicky here. Got some nice turquoises, the greens, and then sort of more the earth colours, and a good range of greys. I think that's a pretty good range in those 36. I think that would cover a lot of bases. It felt really nice to use, that nib felt flexible but not too soft. They aren't replaceable nibs. Some markers, some other manufacturers do have replaceable. Having done the sensible swatching test, I wanted to come up with a project that would let me test these in real life. And I thought, oh, well, what can I do as a painting? And well, I decided not to do a painting at all. Sometimes I worry about where my brain goes. But we went to France probably 7-8 years ago and had snails to eat. They were like garlicky rubber bands, but that wasn't the point. The shells were absolutely beautiful and I couldn't bear to throw them away, so I washed them, put them in a bag, and I've had them ever since. So I thought I would test these out by painting my snail shells. We've had so many snails in the garden this year. That wet spring really did for us, and every morning I go out and pick them off and carefully put them in the field opposite. Next morning there are more. So this is my homage to those snails, which I know are very necessary, but I wish they'd leave my stuff alone. And let me show you how I did them. And the reason I thought this would be handy is it'll really test the covering power of the shell. It'll test the mark making capability, how well it layers, whether rough surfaces fray, those nibs and all those things. So I reckon in a bizarre sort of way, snail shells might be quite a good test for these pens. And as you can see, I've done quite a few already. My plan is to put them in like a deep box frame to display them, mainly because I had a deep box frame to display them. And then, of course, when I tried to put them in, it wasn't quite deep enough. So I will be going to the shop shortly to buy another one. I'll show you all these after I just get going on my final one. I need to start with the base coat, and I'm going to use this one, T112. It's a nice sort of buttery yellow. Still need to give it a shake and then start with that base coat. So these could be very good. I know pebble painting is a popular type thing, or getting little slithers of wood and decorating them to make hangings. Not something I do, but if they can paint snail shells, I reckon they can paint pretty much anything. I haven't done any preparation except wash off that garlic butter. You can see, oops, it's coming off my finger. You can see, I was going to say, that it covers pretty well in one coat. With a pale colour like this, I probably will touch it up, but they dry pretty quickly, so that's not an issue. Other reason for doing two coats is that it's quite tricky to get all the bits when you've got a snail shell balanced on the end of your finger. I will let that dry for just a couple of minutes and then come on to the second coat. While waiting, let me show you some of the ones I've done. So this one, obviously I painted red first, and then I used the brush tip just with the white to make these little hearts, and they're just a single brush stroke. So I wanted to see how flexible that brush nib was, and it's pretty good. And then I did a few dots, so you can get quite a few marks from circles to little sort of heart shapes very quickly. One, I'd done a background of orange, and then again I used the nib on its side, varying the pressure to get these little teardrop shapes, and then I went over and just put little marks once that's dried. Dots are always a good one, so again that was just dotting, done around the back there, and then layered on a couple of colours. I think this is possibly my favourite one, which was just blue with the white dots, and I made the dots on the back a bit bigger. Actually, I like this one as well because it is fresh as a daisy. I think you would agree that those stand out enough. I didn't want to put two layers onto the petals because I thought that would lose the fresh as a daisy look. This one is this very similar flower. Oh, it had a hole in the shell, so I used it as a centre, just with different colours. Flower theme. This one I put stripes in the background and then did sort of sunflowers on it, or some sort of sunny flower with a lot more layers onto the petals, and I quite like that one. This one I've put stripes. It's actually quite difficult to get them straight, as you can imagine. Stripes and dots, which I rather liked. And then this one, sadly, is quite broken, but I had to do it because I was running out of snail shells. And just to compare, garden snails aren't quite as big as edible snails. But my painting is nothing in comparison to nature. Isn't that just beautiful? And if you want to see really, really beautiful snail shells, just look up Cuban painted snails. It's a breed, and oh, they are just stunning. It is circles. Again, I just embraced a couple of holes in there. So circles and dots. This one I tried to follow the sort of strata that you get on the shell. That again was quite a tricky one. Inordinately fond of dots, so I did multicoloured dots on that one. This one should now be dry. It literally only takes a few minutes. So let's deepen the colour on there. Become quite obvious while I was doing this that the paint in these pens dries to a very nice matte finish, which will be great for my mixed media work. And I hadn't really thought about the finish when I was swatching, so I do think it's worth actually using them in real life. Swatching is incredibly helpful, but it's not the same as when you're using them. Other things become obvious. One other thing that did become obvious as I've been doing this is that there's quite a colour shift on some of these paints or inks that again I haven't particularly registered as I swatched. I am going to do something similar to this with the stripes and the flowers and the dots. Started this project, I thought that I would just leave the shells plain, just have them almost looking like little sweets, and because the colours are so gorgeous I thought, oh yeah, that'll be nice as it is, but then I got carried away. Oh, I'm making a mess of this, and actually I'll pretend that I'm making a mess on purpose, because if you make a mess, just let it dry and you can layer over the top, because, well, you can see how well this blue is covering the yellow. There's not a hint of green coming through. So when this idea kind of came to me, I did look online and see if anyone else was painting snail shells. And of course, sorry, I hope this is in shot. Of course, there are people who paint snail shells. That is their art. Who knew? And there are some amazing ones, some incredible ones for sale on Etsy, and they're almost enamelled. People have sea snail shells, which are a lot bigger than these, so I do think that helps. That swirl. There we go. So let me show you what I meant about using these nibs to their sort of effect. So I'm using the side to create the petal shapes, and you can see how well it covers. You get, it really stands out. If you make a mistake and you think it's a mistake immediately, because it is water soluble when wet, you could just wipe it off, or as I say, let it dry and then cover it. Who knew when I became a full-time artist that I'd end up painting snail shells? But sometimes, do you know what? It is nice to do something that is just not too serious, that doesn't matter as such. Let's just do this around its bottom. I'm just trying to think of, say, as many different marks to demonstrate to you. So you can control the dots by being quite gentle like that. I haven't seen any evidence of fraying yet either, which is great. Again, just layer up those centres a bit more. Just a lovely opportunity to explore the marks you can make with this, explore how opaque these colours are, and wow, have a bit of silly fun really. And we've got two different versions of my flowers and stripes. We've got different dotty ones, teardrop ones, got one circle, lots of flowers, tiny ones and dots. Let me know in the comments which is your favourite, and I will show you once I have got these mounted into their picture frame, but I need to go to the shop first. Sadly, I couldn't find the perfect box frame that was going to be just quite deep enough to take the shells. So I've got this little tray instead, which I've just painted white ever so quickly with a bit of gesso, and I'll keep them in here until I decide quite how to display them permanently. I hope you enjoyed the review of the Arrtx acrylic markers, and I know this was rather a strange way of testing their capabilities out, but I think we saw just what gorgeous colours they are, really good coverage they've got, and all the different marks that you can achieve.